saying this is a meeting of the Policy Subcommittee meeting of the Policy Subcommittee of the schools, and this meeting will be recorded. So thank you everyone for joining us today. The main issue that we are going to be discussing is SROs, school resource officers, who are present in our middle schools as well as at the high school. And today is more of an introduction to the subject. We're going to hear from a variety of perspectives and voices and people whose relationship with the schools and the police are in different capacities. So just to quickly begin on the minutes from the last meeting, have subcommittee members reviewed the minutes from the March 29th meeting?
Yes.
All right, would someone like to move them?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Dimitri?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. All right, so as you can see, we have a lot of people here to discuss SROs, and I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Mr. Singleton.
Greetings, my name is Kristen Singleton. I'm parent of two students, a high school student and middle school student at John D. Runkle School. I'm also a member of the task force to reimagine policing and public safety. Been a Brookline resident for coming up on 12 years.
Dr. Liu.
Yep, Andy Liu, I'm a member of the school committee.
Mr. Cawthorn.
Hello, Malcolm Cawthorn. I'm the Brookline High School MECO coordinator, as well as a member of the task force to reimagine Brookline public safety.
Thank you. Mr. Anselm.
Sorry, Mr. Anselm, I'm on the school committee, former teacher at the high school, work with Malcolm over the years.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Wolf-Dickoff. I'm on the school committee. I'm not on the policy subcommittee, but this topic's important to me. I just wrote a paper on it at the Kennedy School, and I'm just really grateful that you're all here.
Ms. Richardson.
Hi, I'm Kimberly. I am a parent of Brookline High students and also on the task force to reimagining policing. And I've been a resident of Brookline since 2013.
Dr. Fernandez.
Hey everyone, Raul Fernandez, Select Board member and chair of the task force to reimagine policing in Brookline. Great to be with you.
Ms. Hatchett.
Hi, good evening. Casey Hatchett. I'm a sergeant in the Community Service Division and currently supervise the School Resource Officer Program. I am also a parent of 4 children in the Brookline Public Schools, 2 at the high school, 2 at Driscoll, a town meeting member in Precinct 12, and a resident for the past 25 years, and currently serving also on the Police Reform Committee and a subcommittee chair for non-traditional roles such as SROs.
Thank you. Mr. Weinstein.
Hi, I'm Alex Weinstein. I'm a member of the task force to reimagine police in Brookline and a third-year law student over at BU.
Ms. McCabe.
Hi, I'm Katie McCabe. I'm one of those officers in the schools for the Brookline Police Department, and I've been in the schools for a long time, I think since 2006, so I know most of your faces.
Ms. Neal Miller.
Hi, everyone. Casey Neal Miller, Deputy Superintendent for Student Services. And I just want to say this is my first time ever being in a meeting with someone with the same name spelled the same way.
Ms. Khan.
Hi, I'm Janice Khan. I serve as the chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee of the Advisory Committee. I also was a resource member of the Policing Reform Committee, and I'm a town meeting member and a longtime resident of the town.
Mr. Amendola.
Hi, I'm Officer Joe Amendola. I've been with the Brookline Police Department for about 17 years, and I'm an SRO in the middle schools.
Mr. Kerrigan.
Hi, Donald Kerrigan. I'm one of the other school resource officers. I've been a police officer
Thank you. I think you froze, but thanks for the introduction. Ms. Pastor?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Pastor. I'm a lieutenant with the Brookline Police Department in the Community Services Division. So among other things, I oversee the School Resource Officer Program. I'm also a lifelong resident of Brookline. And up until this year, I had 4 kids in a combination of Beep and Heath, who are currently at St. Mary's, getting a different experience.
Ms. Monopoly?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Monopoly. I'm a member of the school committee. I'm also have 2 students in the Brookline schools. I have 2 students in the Remote Learning Academy right now. I have a 6th grader and an 8th grader.
Dr. Guillory?
As soon as I can hit the right buttons here. Linus Guillory, incoming superintendent to Brookline. Happy to join you all this evening.
And Ms. Fetterspiel?
Yeah, good evening. Hi, I'm Suzanne Fetterspiel. I am on the school committee. I'm an educator by training, and my 2 children have gone through the Brookline Public Schools.
We have Ms. McCabe. I'm sorry. We have someone else who's logging in. We have 2 Ms. McCabe's.
Caitlin Keneally. Yeah.
Okay, Ms. McNeely.
Sorry, I'm Caitlin Keneally, Brookline Police School Resource Officer at the high school.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so to get started, I think it would be helpful if we can have some context around what an SRO actually is and the history of it. So in terms of what an SRO is, I think I'll defer to one of the current SROs or to Officer Hatchett if you would like to describe that. And then I'll ask either Dr. Hernandez or Mr. Cawthorn to talk about the history. So Officer Hatchett, do you want to tell us about SROs?
Sure. I think I'm actually going to punt this to Katie. I think we probably want to hear more from our SROs, and she's our senior SRO at this time, having been with the program for so long.
All right, go ahead, Officer McCabe.
Okay. So I think the term that we use for SRO has always been, it's just recently we started using the term SROs. Like I said, I've been in the school since 2006 and it's evolved a lot since then. Started just teaching DARE in 6th grade, all the way to now we do safety visits from daycares to BEEP to 1st to 4th grade. We do visits in almost every grade level. The teaching part, or I wouldn't say teaching, the visits to classrooms is in the middle school grades. But we've also evolved into more of a resource for the schools. So that's why we kind of changed it from the educational officer to the term SROs, because we're a resource for the schools. We're part of the school community. We deal with families, guidance counselors, teachers, the principals, vice principals, kind of bring them all together. And especially this past year, which has been the strangest year I've ever dealt with in the schools, where the teachers can't actually put eyes on the students or the families. We were able to, or at least drive by and look through a window. So we've become such a community that I've talked to parents, call me every day. We've become friends. Cell phone numbers have been given out. They probably know more about me than my husband does, but it's just the term SRO is used differently in every community, and I go and meet other communities, especially now that I have a dog. So I think it's a term that people hear and they don't know exactly what we are, but we're just another resource, part of the community, working together with community, but our role is with the juveniles and school, because we also work with kids that aren't in the district, they're out of district placed. So hopefully I didn't talk too fast, sorry.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Officer
I
Hatchett.
just add that we've had, the police department has had officers in the schools for many decades. I think some of us here on the Zoom tonight probably remember their early years in the schools and their DARE officer and have had really meaningful relationships with them. And so for most of our history, our officers that were in the schools were referred to as DARE officers or AWARE officers. 22 years ago, I was a safety officer in the school. And 2 years ago, when Caitlin Keneally's position was created at the high school, as a specifically titled as a school resource officer, we renamed all of our school educators and youth officers as SROs. It's more all-encompassing of the work that they do, which is not just teaching classes. Again, as Officer McCabe stated, she and her partner Bear, for those of you who know our comfort dog, and the other SROs serve really in a capacity to support administration, to support families, to support students, at home, in the school community. They are guests in the community. The school communities, our SROs in the middle schools, do not have offices at the 8 middle schools. Caitlin Keneally, as we know, does have an office at the high school that was given to her when her position was created. And our other 3 SROs, Joe, Donald, and Katie, they bounce around between the 8 middle schools and other schools within the district. They get called in and they're on campus as guests, administration's request.
All right, thank you. Now, we've since had 2 more people join us, so I'd just like to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Mr. Lewis.
Hello, everyone. I'm Torrance Lewis, principal of the Baker School.
And Ms. Norman.
Hi, Mary Ellen Norman, Deputy Superintendent for Administration and Finance, and I also function as the Emergency Response Coordinator for the district and also working with the Emergency Operations Center with the town under logistics and coordinate quite a bit with the police department and fire.
All right, thank you. All right, so now I'll go to Dr. Fernandez. You've been working a lot on police reform more broadly. If you could perhaps provide a context for us for why this is a particularly topical discussion.
Sure thing. Thank you. And I'll kick it over to Malcolm in a second. And of course, he and Kristen, Kimberly, and Alexander have been the team that's really been doing the work on this as part of the task force. What I'll say is I'm excited for this public process. And one of the things that we found through our work is that the establishment of these positions hadn't been done through public process. And we think it's important that the school committee and through extension of the school committee, the public has an opportunity to really weigh in on these roles and whether or not these make sense for Brookline, and if so, in what ways. So I'm excited for this process. I'll just briefly, the charge of the task force was actually to look at alternative solutions to policing and alternative solutions to any number of issues that we're facing in Brookline. What we found is over time, a creep of policing into the social service space. And that was because a vacuum existed. Frankly, that vacuum still exists. And when you look at our recommendations relative to the school resource officer and other programs, it really is about right-sizing our investments in the social service space and making sure that that police officers are focused on their core mission, enforcement of the law and protection of the public safety, but that we're actually investing in folks that are best and most appropriate to meet the social service needs of our community. And so I'll stop there and give Malcolm an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the work of the subcommittee.
Thank you all. The history, is pretty long, and I think, in particular, one of the things that was a struggle in sort of putting together that history is that there aren't a lot of documents or records that say exactly what built to this. And so, in particular, with Officer Keneally's placement at Brookline High School, one of the things for us was at that point, we were of the understanding that there was only one school resource officer. While that start date occurred before the memorandum of understanding, I started with the premise of trying to understand what happened in 2018 that resulted in placing a school resource officer inside of Brookline High School. Frankly, I've never had a satisfactory answer to that, nor an answer that's been consistent, whether it's been select board, school committee, or other. I work in the building and didn't really get an answer from school administration in terms of what precipitated that. There was a law that was passed. That was passed in 2014. Well, it was passed in 2013, put into action on January 1st, 2014. And then an officer was placed in the fall of 2018, a memorandum of understanding in March of 2019. I think the biggest thing for me is not just the lack of public process, that there's nothing I can point to beyond the memorandum of understanding that says what a school resource officer is. And what I know occurs between middle school and high school is actually different. And so it's a struggle to put them under the same title if, the objections that the objectives of the job are slightly unclear, other than to be a resource. And frankly, police have been resources before that. The things that I understand, police to do, what, ultimately got many police into the door, which at first was mostly 8th grade and 9th grade health. So they were both at the high school and middle school, was the DARE program, which later was deemed to be, not successful. And Brookline stopped it. And then they kept the AWARE program, which to me presented a little more collaboration. It was also more middle school. It was out of the 9th grade, became more middle school health. But I think another one of my great struggles is that as much as community is spoken about, what I started to find in looking was that a lot of the community didn't even know these things existed. And I do think there were efforts. I don't want to act like there weren't. And frankly, particularly at Brookline High School, I am more upset that the high school didn't communicate widely to faculty, staff, nor parent community, frankly. But with that, it is an existence that I struggle to understand. I don't struggle with the idea of liaison. I don't struggle with the idea of schools and police working together to provide public safety. I think what I do struggle with is how all this went down without not just a community process, but also an internal process. There's still a good chunk of teachers at Brookline High School that don't know there's a police officer with an office in the building, let alone, what I would think of someone who is within the community, not just at Brookline High School, but at elementary schools. At least in my opinion, and the history is not satisfactory. And I could go more into what I feel should be happening. It's also in, lists of recommendations and other things. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think I think our committee has been pretty clear that, what we see as SROs isn't truly consistent or with the existence. The idea of liaisons and doing what had been done for decades, we have no problem with. And so I can go farther than that. But I'm sure you want to hear from others, so I'll stop there.
Would anyone else from Mr. Cawthorn's committee like to speak about the study that was undertaken and the initial findings? All right, Mr. Singleton.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I think I just wanted to add, this has been a point of discussion among the task force, those of us on the subcommittee focusing on school resource officers, that we wanted to invest the time to understand the current situation before proposing change. And I think we've done our homework, as it were, to try to come to the table today with a clear understanding of the history as best we can understand it, but also to make sure that we are well aware that there are very positive regard for the people who are doing this work. And we wanted to make sure that it's clear that in our doing our work, in our making our recommendations, that this is about the structures and the supports that we're trying to provide for students, not specifically about whether any one person is doing a good job or not. And there are plenty of pieces of testimony support that demonstrate that there is positive regard for the people who are doing this work. But we're asking to think about the system of policing. Often the system of policing where people feel over-policed. Often the system of policing where it feels unclear who is making what decisions that affect the choices about who gets policed that are part of the recommendations that we're making, and not singularly about whether or not any one person happens to be doing a good job or not.
All right, thank you for that. So I'll now ask Officer Hatchett and/or Ms. Khan if either of you could speak to conversations that have been taking place with the select board, the town, the schools around the recommendations by this committee and whether the level of receptiveness to them.
Janice, do you want to go first or would you like me to go?
Okay, Casey, I think you should go since you were the chair of the subcommittee that did the work. Yeah.
You can just jump in if I'm missing something. So it is important to remember that there are two groups that are looking at policing in Brookline. One is the Task Force on Police Reimagining, and the other is the Policing Reform Committee, which Bernard Green is the chair of. Our committee likewise has looked at the SRO program. We heard from the SROs, we heard from members of the school community, we heard from students who had participated in the program, as well as administrators and leadership throughout the district as to their experience with the SROs, the value of the SRO program. Not to speak for head of schools Myers, he has been very upfront about some of the controversy around Caitlin Keneally's office at the high school, as has Caitlin, and has been willing to, has engaged in many conversations about the location of her office and willingness to move that. But our committee did do a deep dive into the school resource officer program. These programs have been very public for many years. So it's not as if we were operating kind of covertly teaching classes underground. Katie McCabe and Bear, I think, have the largest social media following of any public official in the entire town of Brookline. And additionally, for our AWARE program, which is in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, at the beginning of every school year, there's letters that go out to all parents about the program, about the officers and what they'll be covering. So those happen year after year. So certainly the school community is informed. These officers also participate regularly in PTO events. They participate in school events, community meetings. They've been an integral part of the school community for a long time, doing a very similar role. And again, it just seemed inappropriate to call them just school educators because they were doing so much more. And I know we have some district leadership on here today that may be able to speak to some of the ways that they have worked with our SROs throughout the many years. And so we did recognize that there are gaps in notifications to the parent community and engagement with the parent community around the SRO program. The subcommittee has recommended through the policing reform that the school resource officer program does remain intact and an important part of the middle school and high school programs, that we develop a general order within the police department that more specifically spells out the role of the SRO officers, the school resource officers, incorporating as well the Policing Reform Act. We do have the MOU, but we'd like to more specifically spell that out and work with school leadership and the superintendent's office in doing so. We would like to make sure that our school resource officers are included in any of the public school of Brookline teacher training and professional development that might be relative to issues that they're often called upon related to school safety, racial justice, bullying, social media, online usage, and additional topics as they come up from year to year. We also recommend that the SROs will attend principal meetings at least twice a year. Additionally, if requested, that is something that they have been requesting to do for some time. Those meetings have very full agendas, and that's something that they've been looking to do. And Mary Ellen Norman has been an incredible asset to us in bridging kind of those gaps with many of the school administration over recent years. The supervisor of the SROs, which would be Lieutenant Pastor, and my supervisor, which would be the deputy of the Community Service Division, we recommend meet with the school superintendent at least every year to discuss the program and any changes to that program. And we recommend that the superintendent of schools also participate in future hiring of SROs. So if we're to have a vacancy in the current positions, that they are participants in that process. And that we also host a forum for incoming families into 6th grade as they're entering into the AWARE program, to allow parents to ask questions that might, arise beyond just what's, indicated to them in the letter that goes out from all the health coordinators before their programming starts. And also to continue discussions with Brookline High School community and impacted communities. We're currently doing some work with the Teen Center to speak to youths about their experience with the SROs, and another one of our programs, the Walk and Talk. And to further discussions on the location of Officer Keneally's office, and just to continue a dialogue and formulate that more. Those were the findings that after everything we heard and everything we learned, that we're putting forth from our committee.
Thank you. Now I see that Mr. Weinstein has his virtual hand raised and would like to comment. Go ahead, Mr. Weinstein.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to some of the things that Officer Hatchett had to say, and also hopefully to comment on the work of the SRO subcommittee for the Reimagining Task Force, but I understand if there's a better time for me to do that later at this meeting, that's fine.
That's okay, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I wanted to speak to some of what Officer Hatchett was saying about, and I hope I have your title correct, Officer Hatchett, some of what she was saying about the public nature and public understanding of the SRO subcommittee. And she spoke about the middle school officers. It's one thing to say that parents are aware that there are officers who come and speak in the middle school that have recently been designated as SROs. The high school position, for that position, the MOU was signed by an interim superintendent and a short-term police chief. The school committee was not consulted. In the survey that we did of parents with children in schools, only 14% reported that they were aware that law enforcement officers are stationed in the school. 47% said that officers are not stationed at the school, and 39% said that they were not sure. There was no public process around the implementation of that position in 2018, 2019. And as of December 2020, Massachusetts law no longer requires that an SRO be in position at all. And there's going to be a requirement, it's not so much a matter of, it would be a good thing, right, for the police department to be working with the school committee, to be working with the superintendent of schools in order to have an SRO in the building. But as a matter of law now, of the statute that was just passed, that's now a requirement. And there's a pretty good description also of what the term SRO means in that statute that is pretty consistent across the state. And so it's really difficult because we went pretty extensively into the history of the SRO position in our report, and I really want to encourage members of the public and everybody who's interested to go and have a close look at that. But what we found is just there just hasn't been a strong public process about this, and I want to reiterate what Mr. Cawthorn said, that we didn't find strong definitions even of what the SRO position has been up till now.
Would one of the SRO officers at the middle schools like to describe the nature of their work?
I'll go. It's just not teaching that we do. Some of the things that we've strived to do and have set up is is very simple little things. Going into the schools, going around during lunchtime, saying hello to the kids, introducing ourselves. And then some of the other things that we have done as a group is we've got into the gym classes. One of the biggest things that we wanted to strive is to have these kids see us outside our uniform. You know, they see us as police officers at work, but when we leave for the day, we're just like anybody else. We're just regular people. And getting into the gym classes, playing basketball, playing volleyball, they got to see us as just regular people. And I think that has helped us bond some really good friendships with a lot of the kids. And it's something that, you know, we are going to continue to do. And we come up with new ideas each year on stuff that we like to do in the schools. And it's been very supportive with the gym teachers, with the principals. And that's just a few things that we've done so far.
And I can add on to Joe and say, from everything to crossing, I've crossed many of your kids, especially if they're the wrongful kids. We have 3 traffic posts just assigned to us, never mind the 300 assigned to the department. If I am not at a crossing point, the rare days, I'll be at the school saying hi, especially now with Bear, to say good morning to students, see students. Like Mr. Weinstein said, we're not stationed in school, so a lot of parents confuse that language, whereas they know who I am. A lot of parents have my cell phone number. They'll see me in the halls. I've been at the grocery store. It's Officer Katie. But whether they know that we're assigned to schools could be a different story. We do everything from get calls from guidance counselors about kids who might be having dangerous behaviors, whether it's from sexting to talking about fights to having weapons, threats. We've had calls from other departments about stuff that's happened, especially now with the wonderful social media. It's not just within our district anymore, it goes out of district. I've met with families who have kids with school refusal issues, stealing money from parents, family members, domestic situations, finding drugs or vapes in the school or at home, wanting to know what to do. I could go on and on, but I don't know if this is the right time to, but that's why, like Sergeant Hatchett said, our roles have kind of encompassed more than just going in and teaching. It's being that resource. It's being that person to call, even if they can't. If the best team isn't going to be there, which is the emergency response, we can go. Whether sitting there and talking to the juvenile about their favorite flavor ice cream or what kind of pet they have, to being there for a scary situation like a death of a family member that they witnessed or an arrest of a family member that they've witnessed. So we've had stuff that's happened overnight that's been pretty serious, whether it's a stabbing or domestic, and we've called the principals to give them a heads up and get guidance on it before the next school day, because we know how traumatic it will be the next day. So there's a lot that goes in there. Donald, I don't know if you want to jump in with anything extra.
Yeah, certainly. Like Joe and Katie were saying, we don't have like your typical role that you think as a police officer. We're more just kind of a part of the school to help them out on different things. We're a resource that they use, whether it's kids having a hard time with different things. Also, we're a good bridge in between kind of what the teachers are seeing, the social workers are seeing, and then the home life as well, because we do have that connection as well as outside the school. The school only sees them for 6-7 hours, but if they're within the Brookline community, we might see them longer than that, or we might see them more than that. So we can coordinate kind of a full kind of team effort to help them with whatever struggles they're going through or whatever else they're kind of going through. And some of the classes that we talk about are topics that we can bring a different perspective from than necessarily a health teacher. So like cyber stuff, kind of with the cyberbullying, then also kind of with the substance, obviously we have a different perspective than a health teacher might have. And then teen dating, like we can talk about different things. So sometimes we have those kind of tough conversations that sometimes the health teachers might not feel comfortable with, but we can kind of do that. And we help build and establish those kind of relationships. So that way the kids, they feel comfortable kind of coming to us and talking to us. As far as kind of some of the cyber stuff, we say to them that if they're kind of hesitant to talk to their parents about stuff that they're seeing on their phones or as far as cyber stuff, because they might be afraid their parents will take away their phone, we remind them that we can't take away their phone, but we can kind of talk to them, because we want to have that bridge. We want to have that relationship with the kids, because it's tough to kind of be a teenager, to be a kid these days. and what's going on. As far as kind of even the cyber stuff, we didn't have all this when we went through school. So some of the parents are having a tough time with that. And so with that, we also hold kind of forums for parents as well. So we can educate them on what we're seeing in the schools and what we're seeing kind of nationally as well. So that way that they can have things to kind of see or help them have those discussions with their kids. Like that would be a harder thing for kind of schools to do as well. But we also try and work with the PTOs on different subjects like that. So it's a tough thing to try and put into words, but it's an ever evolving role, like everybody else is saying. It's not just words on a piece of paper that we can kind of fully do to try and fully encompass what we try to do. But I'd say the key thing is that we're just another resource, another tool to kind of help the schools and kind of work together to give the kids the best education they can have and also have the most positive day that they can within school.
All right, thank you.
Can I actually just piggyback off Officer Kerrigan, please, for a second, if that's okay?
Yes.
I just, I want to add, when Officer Kerrigan was talking about a team, I just wanted to say that really hit me because we actually are a team. We work so well and so hard together for these students, and particularly the middle school students going into the high school from when I engage with them. And I think I'm thinking about a particular student, and I don't have many notes here. I kind of just speak off key here. But this one particular student has had a really difficult time, and she's had a wonderful relationship with Officer Joe. And initially, the entire beginning of the year and going through school and it being such a chaotic time, she really didn't want to have any engagement with me whatsoever. And it's taken a long time. And slowly, we've really developed our relationships. And it's because of Officer Joe and him communicating with me and us working together and saying, okay, well, what can we do? How can we help this child? This is such a chaotic time for all children. So I think, us being able to do that and then me learning from what the information that he had really helped. And it actually helped with the student because she literally now comes into my office every single day and actually literally took one of her classes, the last class of the day in my office. That was Friday. I'm sorry, I don't know what day it is right now. Literally on Friday. And it's just, for me, it's been wonderful because she has this very hard, strong outer layer, and to be able to develop that relationship with her has been wonderful for me, and really just shows how hard that we try to work together as a team for these students. So thank you.
Can I just add, Caitlin, you don't just work together, the four of you as a team, but you also work really closely with school administration, guidance, representatives that are here from town hall can attest that it's really, a team much beyond just the police. And I know particularly for you at the high school, you are extremely valued by the leadership team there and brought in, at every level with the deans and the headmaster and assistant headmaster. And so it's really important just to acknowledge that it's not just the police that are working together. It's really a community approach to supporting these kids and their families and, staff at the schools.
All right, thank you. So speaking of school administration, I'm going to ask Ms. Norman for her thoughts as she helps coordinate these efforts district-wide.
Yes, I want to correct the record around the origination of the MOU. As I've not had an opportunity or been invited to respond to either committee and provide them with how the MOU originated, why it originated. Because that project actually started when I arrived in 2015. Because there was not an MOU in place, and among the district attorneys in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there was Middlesex County had a model MOU between police chiefs and school superintendents. And so we started this process in 2015 with Chief O'Leary and Joe Connolly, and worked internally with principals and staff and police department members, many of whom I believe have retired since. And so the people you have here some of the people you have here have come into the mix in that process, and that MOUs between the school superintendent and the police chiefs have been in place for decades, particularly to I think and I applaud the conversation happening around what the role of an SRO is and what the role of police in our schools needs to be and should be. I 100% support and applaud that conversation happening, because it does need to be a community conversation. So wanting to make sure that people know and understand that the reason for the delay in the signing happened to be Chief O'Leary retiring, Joe Connolly, Andrew Bott becoming the superintendent, Andrew Bott leaving. We've had leadership and change at both the superintendent and chief of police level. But the change in the statute in 2018 and the update statewide in 2018 caused many districts to review it. So you see a lot of districts now have their new 2018, 2019 versions of the model MOU or MOA, whichever you're going to call it. And Brookline needed to do the same and use the one that was worked on and modified, starting back with Chief O'Leary and Joe Connolly and Andrew Bott. So I think there's been, and some internal review as well. So I just want to correct the record that there was discussion back to 2015, at least when I arrived, that, you know, an MOU was being discussed, and there were conversations with school committee members with regards to the MOU. And it's not a school committee document. It's a superintendent police chief document. At least that's been my understanding. So I just want to make sure people are aware that it's been a long time. It was a long time for that document to actually get signed. So while signed by an interim superintendent, it's not a document that did not see some review internally within the police department and school department staff.
All right, I see that Mr. Cawthorn has his virtual hand raised. Go ahead.
So I'm sure it was crazy, Marianne, but I did send an email to you in September asking, but we also asked Chief O'Leary for other documents of the memorandum of understanding. Are you saying there are more than one?
No, there's only the one that has been signed. Are there different versions? Yes, there are other versions.
What does that mean?
So there's only one document that's signed. But are there other versions? Yes, there were other drafts, if that's what you mean. But there's only one.
No, I mean, how many other memorandums of understanding actually went into effect?
Only one.
So how does that change the record?
My impression of hearing the comments is that this was just sort of happened in 18 or 19. And that it really started, the MOU and the need for an MOU requirement was identified as in 2015.
So can you tell us what precipitated that?
Yes, the fact that there was not one, and there was one that was required. And at the time, when you look in, I mean, I have copies of an MOU from Lexington from 2007. So there's been a long history of a superintendent and a police chief having an MOU around the activities of a police officer in a school building, and when police get called and when they don't get called.
I don't think I'm actually asking you that. I'm saying, like,
okay.
So if I believe, like, Officer Keneally didn't just show up in 2018, but there's nothing. You say you have drafts, I believe you, but there's sort of nothing else before that, and there's nothing to actually say other than that law as reason to put her there. Is that correct?
No, there's a long history. There's a long history of SROs in schools.
But what is that in
SROs
Brookline?
in police departments.
Yeah, but what is that in Brookline?
So the police department would have records of when the SRO position was put in place and funded as part of the police department. There were SROs here before 2015.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, Chief O'Leary has been a liaison to both of these. We've asked. He didn't seem to know that.
They were just titled differently. As I stated earlier, they were titled as aware officers or titled as safety officers.
So who was the safety officer at Brookline High School?
I mean, Leo Conrad, going back before I was there, and I don't know that he was specific to the high school. He was specific to the school system. Ronnie McNeil for many years was an instructor at the high school. You probably remember Ronnie. He used to teach in the health curriculum.
He was my daughter's coach, but I don't remember him being an instructor.
He instructed often, and also in the legal studies course with Bert Skaversky going back at least 20 years. So there's been a long history of having officers in the schools. The safety officer and the DARE officers that then transitioned to the aware officers were all rebranded, doing this similar type work as SROs, as we've stated, when Caitlin's position was created. That is a new position, but the other positions have been doing the same work for many, many years. I would say probably decades.
I mean, there's been a Cawthorn connected Brookline Public Schools since 1975. And so there's always been police officers coming in and out of schools. And I've never challenged that. Like in my beginning, I said, liaisons and other work for public safety isn't really the challenge or what I'm trying to get at. What I'm trying to figure out is, besides the law, which no longer exists, what precipitated putting an officer into a school building, as well as then, I understand the sort of a rebranding, but again, all those officers seem to be doing different things and loosely listed as resource officers, when before there seemed to be some variables. And that's the part that I think, even what Mary Ellen is saying, I still can't track it.
I took as her broader point was that there had been ongoing discussions since prior to 2018 around an MOU and around there being some kind of SRO program. So we may not have all the details on that, but I think she just wanted to mention that it was ongoing. It wasn't something that was suddenly put into place rapidly. So perhaps we can get access to those drafts or more information around that so we can see how it developed, and perhaps the panelists who are here today would find that useful.
I think my point, David, is then, well, I think I'm struggling a lot with the title. If there was other titles before and other things, like how did we merge those titles? How did we describe what they're doing? How did we have a job description? There really only seems to be one for Officer Keneally that has a really distinct structure. And so that is sort of my struggle here, and that's what I mean when I say I'm not necessarily satisfied, because I can't pinpoint and say this is what an SRO does. And I hear the officers, I trust the officers. I've told Officer Keneally, but I trust her work. She does great policing. And Kristen said it best. If I remove her from that and try and think what the SRO does, I can't do it. And I can't actually say what the difference is now from before. And so.
Okay, point taken, thank you. Mr. Anselm, who's one of the subcommittee members, would like to speak. Go ahead, Mr. Anselm.
I think I have a question, and maybe it will modify a little bit what I think Malcolm is asking. So Officer Hatchett, I was going to ask you, can you give us a little bit of background on the impetus for creating the high school position? So I get that was a new position you've mentioned. Do you have a little bit about the history and the decision-making for that new position?
So that was before my time as the supervisor for the SRO program. And so if my lieutenant wants to correct me or Mary Ellen at any point, it was to get us in line with the state law, which was requiring us to have an SRO. It was formalizing some of the work that we have been doing ongoing for years. And it was discussions between the then administration and our then current police administration around the work of officers in the schools, and a desire to bring on particularly Caitlin because of the tremendous relationships that she was building with students. She was assigned to the traffic post, was working in that route, and was frequently being asked to come into the school to provide support and, be part of the community. And so to more formalize that, as well as bringing us into the requirements of state law. I don't know if my lieutenant or Mary Ellen have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think, if we just think about, we're basically trying to serve the juveniles and the families in our community in a way that makes the most sense, not focused on enforcing laws, having us come in when things have gone bad to be the bad guy. As a side note, there's nothing I hate more than going into a store and having a mother say to a child, there's the police, don't do anything wrong or they'll arrest you, right? Like, that's not our job. We're all about public safety and keeping kids safe and families safe. And while we're, in all the discussions I've seen talking about studies, I think it's important to bring up the ACEs study and what we know about children with adverse childhood experiences, that they benefit from interested adults. So I would like you to consider, the officers on our team, they're more interested adults with coming from a different perspective, with a knowledge of the laws, a knowledge of the social systems in place to support our children and our families. And they really do provide a benefit, not only to the children in the public schools, but to their siblings, to their parents, to their caregivers. And we're just another spoke in the wheel trying to help our families and our communities, right? So I think that to draw a parallel that we've probably all become familiar with over the past year, think about working remotely and all of the casual day-to-day interactions that you miss out on by not being in a building with your coworkers. And I think that was part of the reason that Officer Keneally was put at the high school, is to just be there and to be there. Maybe a student isn't going to call Officer Keneally and let her know how their day is, but if they're walking by and see her, those conversations just happen organically, and they happen because she is a great officer. And the same with the other three in middle schools. The kids like to talk to them. It's actually, sometimes time with our SROs is seen as a reward. The teachers use, if you get so many stickers on your chart, you can see Bear. If you do meet these expectations, over the next 4 weeks, you can sit in Officer Joe's cruiser, things like that. You can have a ride to school in a police car. We've seen auctioned off at PTO raffle. So I think having those casual kind of organic conversations with the officers when they're in their school really reduce the impact of negative interactions, in times of crisis.
All right, thank you. Now, Mr. Singleton has asked to speak a while ago. So Mr. Singleton, and then I'll go to Dr. Fernandez. Go ahead, Mr. Singleton.
Yeah, I think Officer Pastor's comments, I think, really crystallized the points that I'd really like for you as a school committee to consider. I think one of the things that it was particularly striking in listening to her say that is that it describes a set of interactions that are sought to be had with my children, but not with me. And I think what I find is that in my experiences as a parent at Runkle, it wasn't until a middle school evening, after having been there as a parent for all the way through K through 5, to find out that there were going to be officers who were going to be teaching content to my middle school students.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think one of the things that is particularly striking about that is it makes the assumption that the relationships that students and police officers have are the same. That everybody is coming into that space with a comparable feeling and understanding of safety and wellness coming into that interaction with officers. And I hear her point, Officer Pastor's point, about trying to either change or to get that to be rethought. But that is something that I think the parents also need to be a part of, rather than it just being, and this is among the recommendations that we had as a community engagement portion of our task force, is that those relationships become ones that are relatively unilateral. They're one way. The police officers are getting something out of it by being able to speak to our children, but we're not getting anything out of it because we're left out of that interaction. You're having interactions with our kids, but you're not making that same investment from a community engagement perspective to do that with us as parents and as families. And that feels increasingly problematic. So the notion that you could say that there would be somebody that might enjoy a ride in a police car is a completely, that has a completely different connotation for lots of other kids that have very difficult experiences of rides in a police car. And I think it feels particularly difficult that we're not looking at this from the perspective of the attempt to have relationships with our kids, but not necessarily involving parents and families in the construction of those relationships.
All right, thank you. Dr. Fernandez?
Thank you. I thought Kristen said that particularly well. And I think this conversation highlights what I've certainly seen and we've seen through our work in the task force as a pattern, which is a lack of process, which invites in these tremendous blind spots. Blind spots to think that for everyone, a ride in a police car would be a treat of some kind. I think tremendous blind spot. We saw this with, we're not going to get into it today, but with the walk and talk program that was established in the Brookline Housing Authority, again, with no process, with no public process or opportunity for residents to weigh in regarding that program. We saw this more recently with a police app, an ill-fated app where members of the community could anonymously report through this app things that were going wrong, but there was no process there. It was no procurement process, as well as no public process. And the select board ended up voting to have that app pulled. This to me is of all the things we're talking about here, one of the more troubling things, because process enables those in the minority who are, and particularly when we're talking about policing here, who might be in the minority in terms of the number of people who live in the community, but are in the majority in terms of those most impacted by policing, to have an opportunity to register disagreement and to say, like, hey, like, I get what you're trying to do here, but that's not going to work for us. And we've heard that from a number of people, by the way, from members of the task force. These are all residents of the community in Brookline. So we've heard that from folks outside of the task force, of course, but there are folks from communities of color on the task force as well. And you see some of them here today. The other thing I want to say is that for the school committee to consider is that these are monies spent from the town side to benefit the school side. And whether or not, if this money was in your budget, if you would spend it this way, if you would have these 4 positions and everything that comes with them, the benefits and all that kind of stuff, to meet the needs that you've heard today. The kinds of things that I've heard, again, good things that I've heard today and we've heard throughout this process that the folks who are in these roles are doing, could be done. I haven't heard anything that requires an officer to do it. I frankly have not. There is also, the fire department is able to engage with the schools and do things around fire safety without having officers detailed specifically to schools, and certainly not to have them stationed inside a school. They're able to do that. So, what is this a good thing? Even if we were to stipulate all of the benefits and none of the drawbacks of these positions, I would still submit to you that this is a luxury. This is a luxury item. Let's say all the benefits, none of the drawbacks, and we know that's not the case. This is a luxury item. And in our budget, do we have room for luxury items in this way? When we know, you all know, you talk about this all the time, that there are tremendous needs that our students have, particularly in terms of social emotional supports by those who are actually trained, well-trained over many years to deliver those supports. And that's not something that we can just sort of wave away and say, this is a really good program and folks really like interacting with these officers. I will stipulate every single one of these people are good people and are bringing to the work, their best heart to this work. But still, we have to think about what kind of investments we're making. So the larger task force report recommends a shift in resources away from programs that address, even at their best, the symptoms of problems, and instead invest in addressing the root causes of those problems. So we contemplate either a new department or in some way building out youth and family services as part of a larger approach to actually invest in addressing those problems. And so in order to do that, of course, you all know as well as we do that budgets are finite. And we've got to find some way to shift those resources. This is, again, about returning police to their core function, enforcement of the law, protection of the public safety. If there was all the money in the world and we had all the benefits and none of the drawbacks, I don't think we'd be having this conversation right now. The truth is that there are drawbacks, and there are people on the task force and off who are uncomfortable with these positions. That's undeniable, because we're here to say we are, and that there are other people who are saying the same thing, right? So I hope that folks won't just try to wish that away. But even with all that said, there are investments that need to be made that should have been made a long time ago. You know that as well as we do. And we've got to find that amount of money to make those investments. And that's what we're recommending.
All right, thank you. See that Ms. Richardson has had her virtual hand up for a while. Go ahead, Ms. Richardson.
Good evening. So I'm super nervous, and I don't even know why. Like this, I've been doing this for quite a while, so I don't know. But I wanted to, I was just taking a few notes. So I wanted to start out by saying, first of all, I went to my dictionary to get some definitions. Resource. The definition of resource is a natural feature that enhances the quality of human life. And so when I think about how is it a natural feature that police officers are enhancing the quality of human life in schools? I don't see that. Social workers help people cope with challenges in their life, okay? Police officers enforce the law, keep peace, public safety, investigate crime, and a lot of other things. What it sounds like to me, school resource officers are acting like social workers in school, and that's not what their job is. And another thing, I'm trying to figure out, and I've heard, why are police officers teaching our children? So if they're teaching public safety, why not provide a video so that they can get educated on public safety? It doesn't make sense to me. And everything that everyone's saying today, all the officers, you're talking like you're providing social work services. And I'm not sure if you all have a degree in social work or if you're police officers, but I would argue that you should be doing your job, and that's not to be police officers in school. Thank you for your time.
All right, Ms. Khan, go ahead.
Thank you. So I would just, I appreciate listening into this conversation. I'd like to just correct a statement that was just made, and also to pull it back a little bit, which is that, first of all, the police officers the salaries come from the town side. It comes out of the police department budget. They're not being paid for on the school side. So that was wearing my chair of the public safety subcommittee hat, which reviews the budget. And I also want to say that the task force and the policing reforms committee came to view policing with two different mission statements. And I think that we really see that in the kinds of reports that were produced, and both of which have, I believe, tremendous value. So I want to pull back a little bit the 21st Century Policing Task Force that President Obama put together and then released a report has 6 pillars. And the first pillar has to do with changing police officers from what's been called a warrior mindset to a guardian mindset. And in fact, the Newton task force, which had a single task force, said that that's their organizing principle as well. So part of that first pillar is the way to get there is to put police officers in non-enforcement roles. That if all we do is see police officers as enforcers, then that's all they are. Then they are just warriors. And so that report, that task force recommended that they have roles in the community that have nothing to do with enforcement. And that's the way that we get to a community where police are part of the community in a positive way. And it seems to me that the SROs is one example of an opportunity for police officers to be in a non-enforcement role, which will move, I would think, I think the goal, certainly that's what came out of Newton, that's what's coming out of many, many initiatives just like this to reimagine and look at what police officers, the role of police officers in a community could be, imagining them. And so I just wanted to reframe the discussion just a little bit, to reimagine police officers in non-enforcement roles so that we can continue to build towards this sort of peaceful and healthy community that I think everybody who served on both of these committees really is seeking to do. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Brown, you're next. Go ahead.
Thank you, David. Deborah Brown here, town meeting member. I sent some of you all a short statement around sort of the adverse effects of the police in schools. And I'm happy to resend it to a broader group. But by and large, the research seems to say that there's a negative value added. That you're actually, for kids who are disproportionately negatively impacted by the police, seeing law enforcement on a daily basis, it's not, there's no value added. And so I want to say that very quickly. Next, I want to say that with respect to Obama's 21st century policing policy, I suspect if we asked him today what he thinks of that report, he might eat his words. If we look at this in a post George Floyd era, a lot of what's in there is, I don't think that's the gold standard anymore for how to think about how we expose people to law enforcement. And if I'm just thinking about it in terms of children and budgets, as a taxpayer, and I know we can't control how the schools spend their money once it goes over to the schools, but put the positions back in ACE. Fund more school counselors. We could do a heck of a lot more for the Metco students than we're doing now. Where's the Wi-Fi for children? You know, pay the paras more. And if I'm really self-serving, ex-debater here, put some more money into school extracurricular academic activities. I suspect for the price of the 3-4 FTE that we're talking about, that you could probably do a fair amount of this. And so, I mean, I guess I would ask the school committee if you have a choice, one, that you recommend that the police officers be removed. This is not, you all are not there to provide, school committee members, to provide sort of a, I don't know how to tactfully put this. You're supposed to foster and mentor growth and creativity and a sense of what a young person's potential can be. And my concern is that when you're underfunded, if we spent this much time as we've spent on law enforcement on how to get money back into ACE, how to increase outcomes, that we might have a slightly different conversation. Well, I'm not sure we'd have this many people on the call, but that to me is where we should be putting our energies. You know, schools are there for kids to learn. They're not there for they're not there for kids to be looking over their shoulders and asking, how am I being monitored? And also there are professionals there that can help kids figure out how to navigate different systems. So that's my 2 cents. And I'll resend my letter so that it becomes part of the subcommittee's administrative record.
All right, thank you. Now we have a couple of our SROs who would like to speak. So Officer Keneally, you first, and then I'll go to Officer Kerrigan. You're on mute, Officer Keneally.
I apologize. I'm sorry. I hear some of the things that people are saying, and we are nice people and socially we do great. I just think that there's so much more. And I wish I could explain it better to you. And I wish you could actually just physically see what happens on a day-to-day basis inside the school with these students. They're not looking over their shoulder concerned about me. I can guarantee you that. My relationships with them go far beyond that. As Malcolm had already attested to it, with several of his students, there's been a particular incident with one of them that an incident happened, and it could have gone in such a horrible direction, but I knew the student, I knew what was going on in his life. He had come to me so many times and sat in my office, and we had so many conversations, and that we were able to work around the incident and grow and work from it. And I wish you all could see that and see what we do. It's not just social work, it's providing them something else. Having them be able to come in and feel so comfortable that they can literally not just talk about socially stuff that's going on or education, it's about pertinent things in their life, things that are happening that they're concerned about, any issues that they're having that they may have, anything that's happening at home, any other incidents that happen. Them being able to come to us with that and feeling comfortable to ask for advice. What are the next steps? Where do I go from here? As a police officer, like, I trust you. How can you help me? And being able to do that is just, I think I wanted to kind of clear and just make sure everybody understands. And once again, I really do wish you could actually see it yourselves to actually understand. So that's all I just wanted to add.
Thank you. Officer Kerrigan.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to kind of continue what kind of Caitlin was saying there. It's about having those connections, building those relationships. If we move away from kind of the guardian role or kind of being a part of the community to just breaking plates of glass or just putting us into those warrior roles, we're not going to have those connections. We're not going to have those relationships where ultimately we're trying to help these kids. Like I say, if you took away the SRO, if the school had an issue with a kid or anything else like that, and if a patrol officer came down, they would just see it as black and white, and they would just see read it by, like, let's say if the law was broken or if somebody needs to be summoned into court for something, they would go with that. But having us in the school, having us have those relationships, we're able to sit down with everybody who's involved. We're able to come up with other solutions. We're able to spend the time, we're able to spend the effort, and we will know who those kids are from being there day in, day out in the school. So we're able to know that they might have done something that they regret or they kind of wish they didn't, but we can work with them. We can work with their families. We know what other services are to provide to help them. Because like I say, they are kids. And so we don't want to kind of have something happen where it has a detrimental effect on them. And so we're ultimately there to kind of help them and build those relationships. But if you just kind of put police officers in that warrior role, it's to the detriment of the whole community, because this should be kind of like a family thing where we're all part of it. We all sit down, we all talk things out instead of just having decisions made from a standoff and not knowing anybody. When you know somebody, you're able to come up with a better decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, speaking of students, we have a student who has joined us who would like to participate. So Robin, if you could elevate Andrew to panelist or give him speaking ability.
Hi, can you hear me all?
Yes.
All right. My name is Andrew Grant. I'm a senior at the high school, and I've known Officer Keneally for around 3 years. We've been able to create a relationship since my sophomore year. Looking back on a couple weeks ago, my first day being back from the pandemic, my first thought was to go see Officer Keneally, just to catch up with her and talk to her as a person. She has been a mentor to me, a law enforcement perspective, and someone to talk to who's not just a teacher or administrative. I totally understand that everyone's saying we can visit social workers, administrative, and teachers, but sometimes you just need to talk to another human being. I have a strong belief that due to the pandemic, people don't actually know who really Officer Keneally is. When you walk down the hallway, all you see is just a cop walking in the hallways. But if you really get to know Officer Keneally, she's a very nice person. She provides an enormous amount of advice and a great perspective on life. It's been really hard for her to have a presence over the last year, but many students have been remote, and to be able to create a relationship with remote students is very difficult. She has had very strong relationships, including my brother and many of his friends in the class of 2019 and 2020. By removing her from the schools, you take away my mentor, a safe place for many students to go, and an opportunity for future students to build a relationship with Officer Keneally. Please consider the resource that you'll be withholding from the BHS community by relocating Officer Keneally to the police station. Thank you for your time, and I hope you'll reassess this proposition.
All right, thank you. Now, we have been joined by the chair of the select board, Mr. Bernard Green, if you would like to go ahead and speak.
Thank you. I came into the conversation a little late, so I'm going to make my comments very brief, but I think making the points that I think are important. You know, for about 30 years, Brookline, the select board, the community, everyone has been working to change the police department into what we think we have today, and that is a department that is responsive to the community policing model. And frankly, I'd like to see if President Obama is going to walk back what is in that report. I doubt that he would, because it's a good report and it puts forth a good concept of how policing should be done in America. Unfortunately, cops aren't going to go away, not in this country. So we got to figure out a way of making sure that they are an important and positive part of our community. And in Brookline, I think we've done that. You know, one of the things that I think can't be missed is that it is important. I think a guidance counselor from Lawrence School, where my son went, so I always look at what they say, you know, put it well. And I'm not going to quote this person, but the idea was that the officer in the school helps to demystify policing. And that's, I think, very important. Demystify. Give people the tools to know how to deal with police in their lives in a way that is going to be helpful to them. So that's one thing. I think that one of the things that the materials that I think Casey distributed to the school committee makes clear is that there's a lot of not just support, but insight, information in terms of the specific things that the SRO officers provide in the school that the school committee really needs to focus on. Not just read those reports, but also talk to other staff members in the schools, get their sense of you know, what the role of the SROs are. Talk to parents. Like someone said earlier, parents aren't involved in this process. You need to involve them, and you may find that they're not that their views will surprise you. And finally, let me just say that. You know, someone said that the school committee doesn't know what goes on day to day with the SRO officers. I used to be on a school board, and one of the most useful things that I did in another state, was when I visited the schools and see what was really going on the floor there in the high school or the elementary schools. I suggested that the school committee take some time and go out and just watch. Spend some time with the SRO officers, just watch what they do, watch how they interact. And I don't know what you're going to find, but I'm sure it will give you a better sense of the role of this program than you have now, unless you've already done that. But it also give you a competent basis upon which to make your decisions as you deal with this issue. That's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot today about the impacts that SRO officers have on our students. We haven't yet heard from building administrators, which I think would be a very important perspective. So if perhaps Ms. Finnegan, who's the principal at Runkle, could talk a little bit about how she sees the SRO program currently.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and giving me an opportunity to speak. I'm going to be very transparent. When I made a video last year for Katie to support Katie McCabe at the Runkle School, and I did it blindly because I just thought she did wonderful work at Runkle. I love Bear. I love seeing Katie. I love the work that Donnell has done and Joe in classrooms. But I am going to say that I do feel like, and I'm relatively new to this position, but there's been a huge lack of communication on the part of the school systems in terms of communicating with parents. One, like what Kristen said is correct. Like when he called and shared his concerns and emailed me, I had never thought about the reasons why he would be uncomfortable with what was happening in health. And I didn't disagree with his concerns. And when parents shared that, I think I shared this in another meeting, when a police officer's car is in front of the building, I get phone calls from parents saying, what's happening? Is there an emergency? I worry about, I hear what people are saying. I worry about the minority in my building, and we do not have a lot of students of color at Runkle. We don't. But if there are only 5 or 15 of them and they're feeling uncomfortable and not safe, as an administrator, that makes me feel horrible. And I want them to feel just as safe as every other student. So I do struggle with this because these are people. Katie is a person. Donnell and Joe are a part of our community, and they do great work. And I've said this before, like a broken record, the connections that they make to the students in our RISE program and their ability to connect with them in the community and be there in case of an emergency has been instrumental to the success of those students interacting in our community. But I do think we need to do a much better job about communicating with families, explaining exactly what the role of police officers are in our building if they're going to be in our building. I don't know if it's changing the name of this role or changing the role description. I don't have the answers to that, but I think, like I said, I value the people and I value the work that they do, but I really value the students at Runkle, and I want everyone to feel equally comfortable with the adults that they interact with every day.
All right, thank you. Now I do want to give some members of the public an opportunity to speak. Please make your remarks brief because we do have some more panelists who wanted to respond to some of what has been said. So Robin, if you could go to Ryan Black.
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you, David. Ryan Black, he, him, his, precinct 6. I organize with Brookline Budget Justice. I just want to say to get bogged down in kind of like the vernacular, like what's happening earlier with these officers in the schools weren't technically titled SROs, or they weren't SROs until 2015, I think really misses the larger points, which are, I think what, Task Force Member Weinstein was getting to earlier, which is the lack of transparency about how there's police in schools and the lack of clarity about what officers do. It's again worth reemphasizing the polling the task force did, and I believe it was Steps for Success did as well, that just very few parents even know there are cops in the schools. And I have to say, and this is a different point, I very regularly followed the task force's proceedings. I can say there was very few subcommittee meetings I missed. The SRO subcommittee in particular constantly reached out to school administrators and the police department for the sort of documentation that Ms. Norman had, was alluding to earlier, and they were never provided that documentation. So I think the fact that no one turned over that documentation, despite them constantly asking, really illustrates how untransparent everything surrounding police in the schools is and has been. And so I hope the members of the school committee think about, A, what's the function in our schools that SROs are purportedly filling, and what kind of professional is best suited for that function? I think to just continue the SRO program as is feels like it's to make a huge assumption that police are the best professional to fill that role. Whereas I think the school committee needs to do its due diligence and explore whether a teacher or social worker might be better suited for that function. And last thing I'll say is, I just need to respectfully disagree with what Ms. Khan brought up about the idea that to have better policing outcomes, we need to expand the scope of policing. I would hope that everyone, every student gets fair and compassionate treatment, regardless of whether they have a pre-existing relationship with an officer. Actually, sorry, one last thing. I want to echo something Malcolm said, that this apprehension about police being in schools is not an indictment about any individual officers, but it's about the programs and the systems at play here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, Mr. Cawthorn has a hard stop at 6:30, so I'm going to give him another opportunity to speak. Go ahead, Mr. Cawthorn.
Thank you, David. And I apologize for cutting the line, but I do have a hard stop at 6:30. So, I mean, I think I would just say, and I think in essence, Kristen was saying this, but one of the things I would like to hear, I hear a lot about how, like, you know, these relationships and other things and keeping kids from perhaps going in the system and other things like that. And it makes me wonder what was happening before 2018. And if there's data around diversionary tactics and other things, like there's something, I would say as an educator standpoint, and not somebody who's in law enforcement, clearly, that the work that we're talking about, which seems inherently right, are we saying that didn't actually happen before? Because I actually believe it was happening before. And so then I have to ask, then why do we need the change? If we were already doing that work, why do we need the change? Why do we need people in buildings to do that? And I have it, again, like, you know, I've been connected to Brookline High School in particular for a long time, but Brookline Public Schools, my daughters went through the DARE program. And so, you know, I understand a place and time, but are we actually saying that SROs have diverted more teens or other kids from going in the system? Do we even have that data? Do we know that? Or are we just saying that? And if we can't actually answer that, then that's a real problem than saying we should keep something where we don't have any basis of comparison. I could easily say I'm the best teacher in the world, but if I have no basis of comparison for that, then what am I really saying? And so I'll just leave it at that and I have to go. I also want to apologize. I had the date wrong. I'm going to re-forward the email that I sent. It was later in the process. It was not so early. And I'll admit to the fault of saying it was early. I said it was earlier than it actually was. But yeah, like I think, like, you know, we have to think about what we're saying. If the police were doing a good job and doing this with teenagers, and like, I don't understand the change or any of the other things. And it's important to remember what I think we are saying is, you know, we've never broached the idea of having liaisons at the Brookline High School. You know, there's been people going to that, what they call the round table on Fridays, since the last century. And so my question becomes, why do we need an officer in the building to do that? And if our goal is really to be, you know, good for teenagers, are we really saying we have to have these integral relationships to do that? Because then I wonder, because I know we're not building relationships with every kid. I know that. As a teacher, when I got 100 kids, I didn't have a relationship with every kid every year. I just didn't. And so, like, I think we have to really think about what we're really saying as we press forward through this and how we're saying it and what's the intentionality behind it. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, I do want to alert everyone that we're at 6:30. We can go a little longer, but I don't want to in any way end up in conflict with the Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity Candidates Forum, which begins at 7 o'clock. So we could go another 10, 15 minutes perhaps, but then we really do need to stop for today. We do have several more people who would like to speak, including some members of the public. So if we can go to Naomi Schweitzer.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Naomi Schweitzer. I'm a Pierce School parent, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. I would like to request to the school committee to end the school resource officer program. And if for any reason it's decided that it is going to be kept at a minimum, parents need to be notified on an annual basis about the program and have the option to opt out of the programming that's offered in terms of what the resource officers are teaching. But my hope is that we could discontinue this program and use the funding for other badly needed school services. I want to follow on what some other folks have said, and also just listening to the school resource officers here today. They all seem like such kind and amazing, heart-centered people on our students. And I wonder if they might want to be social workers or counselors instead, and think that a lot of the functions that they're providing would be better served by some of those roles. And I think part of the challenge that I see here is that even with all of those good intentions, and also with what appears to be amazing connection and relationship skills with some of our students, as Malcolm just said, but not all of them, police come into whatever situation they're in with awesome powers. They come with weapons, and they come with the power of the state behind them and the power to arrest people. And those are scary things for a lot of people. And it's not something that I want to see in our school buildings. And I don't think it's the right place for where police can build relationships with our children. And I also just want to say I've really been hearing today and over the last year, as our whole community has been having a conversation about policing, hearing from parents of color and their perspectives on this, and their need for many of them that they feel to have the talk with their children and how they may not feel safe around police, and where they may feel that they don't have a choice when they send their kids to school and this program is here and they don't even necessarily know about it and can't engage in what it is or whether it should even belong in our schools. I just want to say I hear them and I want to keep learning, and I think we should all be centering their thoughts and feedback as we are considering what to do about this. And as the Lawrence School principal said, we can't have any of our students feeling unsafe because of some programming that we're putting in our schools. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I'll now go to Sergeant Hatchett. I apologize for calling you officer earlier, and for others who may have made the same mistake, did not mean to demote you. Go ahead, Sergeant Hatchett.
Thank you. No worries, David. Thank you very much. And thank you, Naomi. And I think it is important to just remind the members here tonight that some of those concerns around, and Christian's points as well, around notifying parents and having more engagement is why the Reform Committee has the recommendations that it does to really shore up those communications with the community, to engage parents, to make sure at early stages that families are aware that the police, our SROs, are in the schools. I would also just like to say that if our SROs are not in the schools, it does not mean that there will not be police in the schools. We do, unfortunately, have calls at our public schools, at the high school, at all of our elementary schools, whether that be a medical or other type of, potential threat or concern at the school. There will be officers that will be responding, and we feel strongly that having officers that are known to students and staff really help de-escalate fear in times when that might be heightened. And so having those previously established relationships in the good times help de-escalate and keep tensions at a minimum, and keep people calm when there are more stressful times that they're being called upon to come into the schools. Also, I would just like to mention Select Board Fernandez in his statement said, that they were looking to address the symptoms of problems. And I can only just say that that is one of the primary roles of our school resource officers, to address symptoms of problems amongst our youth in the schools. They are not disciplinarians for school processes. They are there, however, to do what they can to avoid youth in our community ending up in the criminal justice system. So people like to talk about the school to prison pipeline. I can assure you that that is the opposite of what our school resource officers role is. And time again, our officers, instead of putting a child into the court system, will work with school staff, work with parents, and work with the youth to divert them away from that system, and to address the myriad of other problems that may be resulting in more high at-risk behavior. Even just this year, we've had incidences where we have had staff people at the high school assaulted and causing serious injury. And if we did not have an SRO who was so well trusted by the staff and the student, and having a relationship, our walk and talk officers with the family, the outcome for that youth might have been much different. And we may have found that he, by an officer showing up at the school without those resources, the history, the time, the training may have resulted in that young man being arrested. And so our SROs have countless stories that they can share. I can tell you none of our SROs have made an arrest of a student in their schools, but they do frequently work with school administration and parents and youth for the best outcomes, to prevent harm, to prevent these youth from entering into the criminal justice system. And they can talk more about any particular situations that you may have questions about, or share that information. But I think it's really important to remember that we are one spoke in a wheel of trying to reduce poor outcomes for youth across the district, and really want to work with our school community, our parents, administration, staff, to make that a better system. And which is why the recommendations from our Reform Committee are to really bolster those relationships, more public process, more awareness. So thank you for raising those issues, Kristen and Naomi as well.
All right, thank you. Officer Pastor, and I've been trying to speak for a while. Go ahead.
And my point is quick, and I just want to say there seems to be a narrative out there, and I've seen it a few different places pop up, that removing these 4 positions from our organization, because they do come out of the BPD budget, as Janice explained. And there's a narrative out there that removing these 4 positions from the schools frees up all this money that can be used for all these other programs, which I agree sound wonderful, but it's the police department budget. And as an administrator here, the work doesn't go away just because they're not physically in the schools. There are plenty of situations that occur off school grounds that are, they've been working extremely hard. I would say they've had an increased workload since March of last year. Juveniles are still involved in the criminal justice system, whether they're witnesses, they're victims, they're perpetrators. They've been busier than ever, even with school not in person. So I don't want this to be a financial decision that's made that's not actually based in reality.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant Pastor. I apologize again with the titles. Okay, next up is Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff. Go ahead.
Thank you. First I want to thank Sergeant Hatchett and Lieutenant Pastor and all of our police department reps for being here today. And I also want to thank the Select Board Committee and Task Force members, especially those of you who are volunteers and residents. And I'm not exactly sure who all was here, but I think Malcolm, Alexander, Kimberly, Kristen, I think I'm missing some. And of course, Raul and Bernard for your leadership. I guess for me, as a school committee member, for a longtime school committee member, at least one question is, if we had never had this particular position, would we create it now? I'm not talking about the individuals, I just mean the position. Would we create it now? And I feel honored that I have had pre-existing relationships with some 28 out of the 35 people on this call. And I know many of our school resource officers are quite beloved in our community by many people, including our school principals. And I want to acknowledge that. I'm also concerned though that conversation we're still talking past each other a little bit, because I also want to acknowledge that we have a pretty diverse community, and different people in our community have such radically different experiences of seeing a police officer, any police officer, anywhere in their environment. And here's what I mean. I think many of you know that even Sunday in Brooklyn Center, which is a suburb of Minneapolis and just 10 miles from where Derek Chauvin is on trial for the murder of George Floyd, a young Black man was shot during a traffic stop. And while everyone is still learning more information, at least one perspective was provided by the police chief, which is that the officer had intended to use a taser and not a gun. So I have no information on more than anyone else, but let's assume it was a mistake, and let's assume, I think there are some people who, might assume, well, you know what, mistakes happen, and of course they do, and it's a tragedy and it's unfortunate, but that's the nature of the job. I think there are probably people of color. I know there are people of color in our community who look at a situation like that and say, if that was a mistake, mistakes can happen here too. And they sort of will think about themselves in these various situations, not necessarily the people they know, but seeing a uniform, seeing a gun, seeing sort of the presence. So I want to be quite thoughtful about all of the important and really, really crucial services that our police provide in our schools. I also want to think through how that can happen in a way that acknowledges and names the experiences of particularly our Black and brown children, or Black and brown boys, but the parents also, and how they experience seeing police officers in the school. So I think if we don't acknowledge that, we're going to keep talking past each other. And I think we're probably not going to get to a particularly helpful answer for the kids, which is my first priority, but not my only priority. So thank you for being here. And I do hope that we can have that conversation.
All right, thank you. We have another member from the public who would like to speak. Robin, if you could promote Ann Weaver.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, okay, great. Hi, I'm Ann Weaver. I'm a member of the task force, but I'm also a parent of 2 kids in the Brookline High School. We are a multiracial family, and I want to speak briefly from both perspectives. Just in response to what Lieutenant Pastor said, the money for the SROs may be housed within the police department, but there's always the possibility that down the line we could reimagine and look at the budgets for the town and come up with an alternative to the SROs by hiring maybe more social workers or other people who could, like with adolescent experience, who could be in the high school doing the work that the SROs are doing right now without having guns. As I really wanted to speak more as a parent for my comment, which is I'm part of a multiracial family, and both my children are of high school age. They're in the high school. And one of my children, who is Black, has expressed fear of having a police officer in the building. And this child of mine, I'm not gendering them, has also told me that their friends of color have expressed the same concerns and that they would feel much more comfortable if there were not police officers in the building in those roles. So I think, that's hearing that not just from my family's experience, but from other kids who are also in the high school and experiencing these same feelings. I think that in itself is a reason to look really closely at this program and see if some alternative can be created to remove police officers from the building in that role and replace them with non-police police officers who are trained in the same sorts of issues and don't carry weapons and don't have that fear response from Black and brown children who have legitimate reasons to fear police. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Maria Leites, who's the head of guidance, would like to speak. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Maria Leites. I'm the director of school counseling and clinical services for the district. And I've heard several folks talk about, diverting funds to more counseling. And of course, I always appreciate that. But I really also want to bring, the perspective of how we work with our SROs and our police in the schools. And it really is a collaborative relationship where we're supporting students. The times really are really complex. Students and families, they're really complex. There are a lot of different needs, and it really requires a lot of different expertise to help families. Since coming to Brookline 4 years ago, I was actually really impressed with the training and that the Brookline police receive and how they work with students and how much they really care about students. Their priority really, in my experience, has been supporting students and not that enforcement of laws role. It's been a tremendous priority on building relationships. So if we keep police as enforcers, then some of the first interactions with police could be when something has gone wrong, when a student has made a mistake. And at that point, they're absolutely going to be scared. And I don't want that. And I also say that as a parent of two African-American children at the middle school level. As I said, times are really complex. We have to manage things in the schools that we didn't even imagine we would have to even 10 years ago. And I also say from the perspective of evolution, kind of considering the role of guidance counselors. Originally, guidance counselors focused on scheduling and college planning. And if our roles did not evolve to meet the needs of students today, then we would be failing them, because there's a tremendous need to support students' mental health needs. And I think we have to look at that as well in how the evolution of our SROs and police work with students in the building is really, do we want to keep them as enforcers, or do we want to evolve their role to really meet the needs of our students today? Thank you.
Thank you. To that last point that you just made, and it's something that Dr. Fernandez brought up, and also Mr. Green coming at it from another perspective, which is the question of whether we want our police officers to be community officers, or if we want them to be focusing on their traditional core responsibilities around law enforcement. And just speaking for myself, I think it would be helpful as we move forward in this process to gain a better understanding of the literature around that question. Because I think it's fundamental to how we want to proceed as a school committee and as well as a community at large. So having said that, I'll now turn to you, Dr. Fernandez. Go ahead.
And I know we're getting up to it on time, so I'll be relatively brief. I think this is one of the areas that I just wanted to correct the record. It was sort of incorrectly stated that this is the police department's budget. In fact, it's the town of Brookline's budget. And as the school committee members know well, budgets for individual departments go up or they go down depending on priorities and depending on the circumstances. And so the select board, along with the town administrator, make an attempt to set those priorities. And then ultimately town meeting is the body that decides what they should truly be. And so, so just budget wise, that's the way that budget actually works. And this is, what we're talking about is reshifting those priorities in the ways that I described before. So I won't get into that, but I just want to make sure everyone's clear about how the budget works on the town side. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Officer McCabe.
Okay, also, I have notes, but I'll go very quick because the time. Someone mentioned earlier about we've all talked about the enforcing versus guardian and warriors. My goal for the past many years is to I don't even know how to do a court complaint, is to keep the kids out of court. The first thing I say in the first class when I introduce myself, especially in 6th grade, when I meet them, I go over what I wear so that it's the elephant in the room. I mean, everyone just stares at what we wear. But like I said, we've also evolved since I've been in the schools. Like our uniforms have even evolved. Like we've gone to a softer uniform. Just because when I first started, kids didn't have cell phones. Like I'm old, but that's how far ago it was. So we are continuously changing. That's why when things happen, we change. We have honest and open conversations with the students, whether it's in the classroom, at the dances, in the hallways, lunch or recess. I mean, after school shootings, we have talks. If and when we ever get back into school, we'll have talks. This year has been very difficult because of COVID and being virtual, but I've still have talks. I sit in front of the high school, I'll have talks with students. The best parts of my day is a kid come up to me and tell me they got accepted to this college or that college. When I remember talking to their parents in middle school and they didn't think they were gonna make it to high school. So it's been, and I remember talking to Christian being like, thank you for reading the letter, because I really don't think any parents read the letter, which I'm a parent too. I get stuff from the school so often I'm like, I'm not gonna read it. But I've been trying to do parent nights for years. The last one I did at Lincoln had the best attendance, and it was pretty much teaching parents how to use an iPhone and how to put privacies on it. So we are welcome to change. We want change. We want to talk to the students about what's going on. We want students to talk to us. We've been working with programs at the high school and having students talk to us about their experiences. We learn from these kids. I knew nothing about Snapchat until these kids taught me about Snapchat. We use the high school students to come into school with us because we also were middle school kids, and they're going to listen to someone closer to their age than a dinosaur like myself. So we do all that. We work with parents that the kid sending an inappropriate picture to another student, especially at a different town, they could be charged with a felony. At 12 years old, you want to be charged with a felony? So we talk to the kids about outside of school. This is what this is going to look like. If you do this outside of school, you could be charged with a felony. You as the parent could be charged with a felony. It's your phone. So we're working with them to educate them about this is what the law is. This is why it is. We don't make the laws, but we want you to know this is what the law is. So I work closely with, like Donna said, I work closely with the RISE program, the ALC program at Lincoln. I work with special needs parents because their kids are most likely to get called on. So I even signed up and went to QBS training, the safety care program that the schools use. We've gone to restorative justice training. We've volunteered to go to CIT training for mental health training. We go to mental health first aid for school responders. We do all this because as the world's changing, as these kids are changing, so are we. So that we're trying to help them not get into that school to prison pipeline that everyone keeps talking about. We don't want them to be in court. We would rather them be in school. I always tell them, I want to make sure you're comfortable in school. You feel safe in school. I mean, there was another school shooting today. The first one gone was the officer. So we want them to see us as a resource to come talk to. Sorry, I know I said I was going to keep it short.
All right, thank you. Now, we do need to finish very quickly because I don't want to conflict with the bridge forum, as I said. So I'm going to ask the subcommittee members, as well as any school committee members who are present, what is it that you would like to know for our next discussion on this topic so that we can continue to progress as we deal with this issue? So Andy or Jennifer, Dimitri, Susan, Suzanne, any thoughts?
Well, I have a bunch of thoughts, but I'm not a subcommittee member and it's 6:56. I'm wondering if we can pick this up again, David, because I think what I'm most concerned about is that, again, I feel like we're not quite having the same conversation still. I'm hearing a lot of talking past, and I would love to spend a little bit of time trying to synthesize and kind of get those two pieces into one conversation, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I'm just wondering if there's anything that we should be specifically doing to prepare for the next time we discuss this. This will be the first of many discussions. This is not the last, it's just the beginning. An introduction to the topic and giving as many people as possible an opportunity to opine. Any other school committee members have some thoughts?
David, I don't have anything for tonight. I mean, I think this has been very informative. I could always follow up with you with additional thoughts in terms of it, but this is, for beginning conversation, this was very informative for me.
All right, excellent. Dr. Guillory, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any questions or thoughts or anything that you would like us to focus on for the next time we discuss this?
No, I think similarly to Dimitri, I appreciate hearing the various perspectives. Certainly some of the struggle points with the origins and how might we, as Susan is suggesting, have the conversation where we are actually talking about the same thing. So I've been taking copious notes as the various viewpoints have been shared. So I'm excited to continue hearing the conversation as it develops and fleshes out.
All right, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This was a very robust conversation. I greatly appreciate your attendance, your participation, the viewpoints that you've all expressed. I know this is a very difficult subject, but it's an important one, and we're going to continue to discuss it in a thorough manner. So thanks again, and we'll be in touch.